Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Shane is not here today. He's with his bro. They are going out on some kind of biking expedition. However, that allows me to be here with my guests, Mick West, and have an amazing conversation on the subject of UFOs, the UAP report, or the UFO report that's supposed to be coming out from Congress, and the alien hypothesis, something that I don't think Mick West all that much agrees with. But let's have a conversation about it. Joining me is author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect, and host of the podcast Tales from the Rabbit Hole. He's a retired video game programmer who helped make Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise. Mick runs the website metabunk.org, where he investigates conspiracy theories, debunks pseudoscience, and investigates UFO videos. Mick West, the one and only Mick. Again, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. And my point of view on the UFO stuff is that it's us and not us, that it's both. That there is tech that more likely than not our government has access to. And on top of tech that our government has access to is not going to tell us that it has access to that tech. The catch becomes, what is that tech and what is the capabilities of it? I also, however, believe that some of this stuff is not us. As what's being described is a radical departure from what we have access to, and basically breaks our laws of science if what's being reported is accurate. Now, what part of that do you disagree with? Just to start, I just want to get the basic premise set.
Well, I agree with the last part that you said. If what is being reported is accurate, then it's kind of breaking the laws of physics, and we'd have to look at some kind of major breakthrough to explain it, either some kind of new development in our understanding of physics, or perhaps even technology acquired from somewhere else. However, my feeling overall is that the evidence that people put out for these things does not hold up to scrutiny. And I'm saying this from personal experience because I've done a lot of investigating UFO evidence, mostly in the form of UFO videos, but other things as well. And it's going back over multiple years, and I've been almost invariably, well, actually really invariably disappointed in not finding any evidence of advanced technology or aliens. So I take these videos and I look at the claims that people make about the videos. I'm not trying to take the videos and use them to disprove the ET hypothesis. People put the videos out and they'll say things like, this shows a rotating flying saucer. And so I look at the video and I think, does it actually show that? And then I investigate it and no, it doesn't. And this happens over and over again. So I've been sadly disappointed numerous times.
Well, I mean, the videos is just one part of it, though. I think you'd agree with me. The video is just one aspect. It's just the aspect that is shown to the public. But there's also the video, there's a pilot testimony, oftentimes there's other data, either from the ships or something like that. Is the video, for example, you were on CNN and you were having a conversation with Chris Cuomo. And I think you can hear this. I'm going to play this. Let's see. Let me know if you can't hear this.
The Navy name is Gimbal. The UFO encounter taken aboard a Navy fighter jet from the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Teddy Roosevelt off the...
Okay, so you can't hear that.
I hear it now.
Okay. Okay, I'll play it like this.
Eastern seaboard near the Florida coast. Again, sophisticated people, pilots seeing this thing, they don't know what it is. It doesn't make sense to them. They don't even get the rate of speed.
Sure, they don't know immediately what it is, but I think perhaps later there, when they analyze it, they would figure out what it is.
Now, the Pentagon released 3 videos. The gimbal was just one of the videos that the Pentagon was released. When you were having a conversation with Chris Cuomo, you were trying to give him an alternative suggestion for what this could potentially be. The alternative suggestion that you gave him, though, I mean, do you have any experience from the standpoint of either being in the military in the context of flights, aviation, radar, analytics, or understanding how that stuff is, how that stuff operates in real terms of physical matter reality? Because what I'm getting at is, looking at this video and analyzing the video, how can you come away with some of the assessments? You gave an alternate hypothesis, but the alternate hypothesis doesn't necessarily solve or doesn't necessarily deal with all of the factors that are present. Meaning you also have to deal with the testimony of the individuals involved and the fact that the Pentagon released this. The video in question that we're talking about, let's say for the moment, you made the point of saying this looks like an airplane and that the people later on will be able to understand what it is. And yet, this was one of the videos that was included within the context of the task force. This was one of the videos being analyzed, and this is one of the videos that were released. Why do you think this video will be released as a UFO video, as a UAP video, as unexplained, if they didn't know what it was? If that makes sense.
Well, yeah, identifying what something might be in terms of like a general thing, like, it's a distant jet engine. It doesn't identify what it actually is. It could be a foreign drone, or it could be a friendly plane, or it could be some other type of aircraft. But just let me give you a little bit of context here. My experience with this goes back to the kind of a semi-famous case from Chile, which was an investigation by the Chilean Air Force, which they spent 2 years investigating this one UFO case. And it was something that looked very similar to the gimbal video, in that it was a black blob off in the distance, which did not look like a plane at all. It looked like this weird asymmetric black blob. And the Chilean Air Force investigated this for 2 years and couldn't figure out what it was, and eventually declared it was this genuine unknown. And then they released the video, and a bunch of people, including me, tracked down exactly what it was just in a few days. And it turns out it was actually an airliner, an A340, a four-engined plane, departing Santiago Airport in Chile, Santiago. So, just because there is a body of people who couldn't figure something out, it doesn't mean it doesn't actually have an explanation. And going onto the gimbal video, we don't really have any context for what analysis has actually been done, or who has done that analysis, or what they have determined. So all we have is this video, which shows something that looks kind of similar to the Chilean one, which was a solved case. It's a glare that obscures the plane. The glare of an infrared engine can be a lot bigger than the plane, and there's multiple examples of this. And then you just got to explain why it rotates. And no, I don't have experience flying fighter jets. I've flown a small plane, but I can read the patents. I read the patents of the Raytheon AFLIR system, and I have a fairly good understanding of the optical pathway. There is rotating mirrors, and there's a rotating gimbal system, and the results of those will almost invariably create this little rotation at various points. So if you've got a distant plane, it's a bit out of focus maybe, and it's creating this glare, and maybe there's some dirt on the window or something that contributes to the shape of it, it would create this. So this is something that people can verify for themselves. They don't have to trust me. I've got no experience. I'm just a former video game programmer. But you can look at what I'm saying, look at the evidence that I'm presented, and check it for yourself.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I'm not taking that away from you. And it's not so much that the video game experiencer and everything else makes you unable to speak about this stuff. I guess what I'm getting at is, though, the Chilean situation was one thing, but the Chilean situation... But again, let's do this. Let's go to something that's a little bit more specific. Because the gimbal, you're right. We don't have anything outside of the gimbal to explain analytics, analysis, any of that stuff. But what about something like the Nimitz, where you have like David Fravor, who is observing what seems to be technology. He is engaged with it for multiple minutes. It accelerates at obscene speeds. We have information behind the scenes. We have corroborating evidence from the other pilots. How does a case like that? I mean, for example, one of your tweets made the point. You said you can't rule out aliens. And then you say, but it's never aliens. So which one is it?
Yeah.
Like, because the David Fravor thing, how do you explain the Fravor issue?
Okay.
Because you can't,
let me explain that quote.
Yeah.
That quote, you can't rule out aliens, but it's never aliens, meaning that aliens is always a possibility. But in case after case that we look at, it never resolves to be aliens. We never figure it out.
But is that true?
What happens...
I guess what I'm saying is that true?
There's two... Let me just finish what I was saying. What happens in every single case that's investigated is either one of two things. It's either resolved and we figure out what it is, it's a plane or a bird or whatever, or it remains unidentified because we don't have enough information. Now, there's a third option that might happen, is that we figure out that it is aliens. That third option has never happened. We've never got to a case where we've said, here's a case, the evidence shows that it is aliens. So yeah, aliens is always a possibility, but it never actually is aliens as proved by any of these cases.
Okay, that's fair. But let's go to Fravor. Like I said, in Fravor's case, one or two things is true. Now, the Pentagon, basically, the military says it's not us. Okay. The military, I have no belief that the military is going to come on and say, yes, this is our secret special technology. So that's fair. But we are stuck with something. Fravor is describing something that is radically different. It's a radical departure from our avionics, from our understanding of physics, the capabilities of it, the speed that it exhibited, even the capability of being transmedia, where it seems like, or the descriptions of it coming out of the water from multiple sources, not just Fravor. And so,
not Fravor. He did. Fravor never said that.
Well, Fravor, okay, fair enough. But there were people around. Fravor said that he saw it bubbling underwater. It looked like something was coming under the water. Would you agree with that part?
Yeah, but he didn't see it come out of the water. He said he thought it might have been connected, but he initially saw it hovering over the water, was his description.
Okay, that's fair. There were other people who were on it who said they saw it coming out. But let's keep it like that. Fravor said that he saw it bubbling near the water.
I don't think that's true, but
well, I'm just telling you. I mean, Fravor did say he saw something bubbling under the water. I mean,
he did. He said he thought he saw something that looked like a seamount. He described it as like waves breaking over something that was underwater, which roughly the shape of a plane. Okay, and so then he noticed this thing above the water.
So at the very least, we have some notion that there's something connected with the water.
We do, but. There's another aspect of that. If you look at the earlier reports and some of the leaked reports, which were aren't entirely clear if they're true or not, the first description of it was that they saw this description over the water, and then they saw this object 4 nautical miles to the west of this disturbance in the water. So I think we've got a lot of conflicting reports. If you compare Alex Dietrich's report of it, she describes it as moving at like 400 knots across the disturbance in the water, whereas Fravor describes it as just hovering there and making slight movements left, right, up, down.
Well, they might have been looking at it at different times. I don't think it's conflicting. I mean, they're looking at it at different angles and whatnot, and they may even be seeing it at different times. They're describing in different ways.
You try to line up their accounts. If you go in depth in their accounts, they really don't line up.
Well, they do line up. I mean, both of them were if their accounts didn't line up, they wouldn't be sitting there talking to one another. I mean, you would have all sorts of problems having them sitting there side by side if their accounts didn't line up.
Well, I'm talking about the historical accounts, the accounts they gave for this executive report and the interview that Alex gave when she was referred to as source. And the earlier reports that Fravor has given, including his old interviews, they may have converged now, and they haven't really gone into much detail now.
Do you agree with me, though, that the basics of the report of an object that they tracked didn't have necessarily any surfaces in the typical way that an airplane would have surfaces, et cetera, and phenomenal speeds?
I think they probably saw some kind of tic-tac shaped object.
Exactly.
That probably is what actually happened.
Now, if it's us, fair enough.
But not phenomenal speeds.
Right, but I guess that's kind of my point. The report is basically saying it's not us. We spend $1 trillion a year on the military. And we've just encountered, based upon our pilot testimony and based upon the data and everything else that's surrounding it, something that is radically different than the design and even mode of operation. If it's not us, and if we're saying it's not us, and if the report is saying it's not us, one or two things is true. That we've been leapfrogged, despite spending $1 trillion a year, despite spending 9 times more than every other nation combined in regards to military, or more than the 9 nations combined in regards to military. We've been leapfrogged, or it's something that is not of human acumen. It's one or the other. And I guess when you consider this notion of evidence, it seems like the evidence would cut more on the side of, okay, either something is going dramatically wrong and we've been leapfrogging our technology, or it's not us. That's why the not us keeps getting emphasis.
Only if you take these accounts as actually representing the actions of a physical object that actually did exactly what they said. Yes, if you look at these reports, like the SCU does this really, really long report where they take these accounts and do some equations and figure out that it's beyond the realms of known mechanics. But that's kind of making all these assumptions. There's one scenario that really hasn't been considered, which is that Fravor and Alex Dietrich made mistakes in their perception of it and perhaps in their recollection of it later. If you look into what Fravor describes, what it actually matches very, very closely is a thing called a parallax illusion, where he's misjudging the size of an object. It's this featureless object, and if it's featureless and you've got no context around it.
Both of them are having a parallax illusion as they describe something?
But they're not. That's where their accounts differ.
But isn't that somewhat of a leap of logic? I mean, they're basically telling you we've spent billions of dollars training these guys. These guys do this for a living as fighter pilots. Their ability to perceive and understand their environment is paramount to them being alive, for one, but also for them accomplishing their mission. And you're basically saying they're seeing swamp gas.
No, I'm not saying the swamp gas at all.
I'm being hyperbolic when I say swamp gas. But
I know. It's a silly reference. But what I'm saying is that there's a possibility that they made a mistake. And, the reason I say it is kind of based on things that Fravor himself has said. Well, on the Lex Fridman show, he was asked, how do you know how big this thing was or how far away it was? And he just was like, 15 years experience as a fighter pilot. But then he was asked, almost in the next sentence, how often do you make mistakes in perception? And Fravor started going on about how you make mistakes all the time when you try to eyeball things. And he was saying that they were trained specifically not to trust their eyes and instead trust their instruments. But at the same time, he's saying that, he trusted his eyes with this because he had all this experience. He also went on to say in another interview that when he flew down to meet the Tic Tac, he didn't go all the way down to it because they are trained not to get too close to the surface of the ocean because of visual perception issues cause pilots to fly their planes into the ocean. And he said that happens all the time. He literally said that happens all the time, that pilots would lose the perception of how high they are because there's no frame of reference. So there's all these things that can go wrong. And perhaps, once every 20 years or so, two pilots might have a similar type of illusion. This is something that happened 17 years ago. It's not like this exact same thing. This Tic Tac encounter dogfight is happening every day with multiple pilots. It happened once 17 years ago. So, maybe they made a mistake and maybe they both made a mistake.
But that's kind of my point. For me, I think the overwhelming majority of the things that people see are just us. Either China, Russia, or the US, the special secret tech, either hypersonic, etc. By the same token, I only need one case. And for the standpoint of Fravor, it is a leap it's a jump of the shark to say they just misperceived. I mean, because your point is right. When you're talking about Fravor and you're talking about this notion of trust the instruments, they're talking about flying into the ocean. Meaning, don't trust your eyes when you're trying to eyeball your height or your distance and everything else. But that's not what this is. That is a human being looking at an object that they can't tell what it is, can't perceive, and can't figure it out.
Despite the fact that they're relatively close to it.
Well, it's not.
If you can't tell how far away it is, you can't tell how fast it's moving or how big it is.
I know, but at the very least, you can give some level of a perception. You can give some level of distinction because it's not like it's blending in with the water. I guess that's my point. This is not the same thing as using instruments where you're flying into the water. This is talking about a human being looking at something that they've never seen before and multiple people seeing it.
Exactly. They've never seen it before, so they don't know how big it is. They don't know how far away it is. And what he describes is exactly the same as essentially a balloon just hanging there in the air and him flying around it, misjudging the distance to it and thinking it's on the opposite side of a circle. Notice how he describes it as mirroring his movements.
Yes.
And it's very strange.
Flying.
Our options here, he has some kind of illusion where it's actually in the middle, or we've got some kind of telepathic alien that's mirroring his movements.
Mick, there's nothing here to postulate it was an illusion. It's just not. And the problem is, if it's one
person... An illusion
person,
matches the evidence.
But it doesn't match the evidence. You have two people who are observing what they are considering to be technology. And in the context of that observation, it leaves. Meaning, if it's a balloon, how does the balloon leave at remarkable speeds? You also think he was misperceiving that. That it takes off.
It does.
But why? Why do you believe? Mick, this is a hard pill to swallow. And this is why I'm glad you decided to come on with me. You are basically saying that all of these people are just misperceiving things. That you had two people who are looking at an object, two people looking at an object that they've never seen before, which means they are paying heavy attention to that object. And in the context, for example, if somebody pulls a gun on you, oftentimes you're paying attention to the gun, not the person. So trying to identify the individual, their features and everything else becomes somewhat difficult to do because you're paying attention to the gun. In this case, these guys are encountering something that is wildly phenomenal to them. And whatever you want to say, whether you want to say, okay, it's just our secret tech, you have to, on some level, admit that they were encountering something and that thing took off at remarkable speeds. A balloon is not going to take off at a remarkable speed.
No.
What did I say wrong?
Taking off at incredible speed is entirely consistent with what I've just described. If Fravor was misjudging the distance to it, it was actually in the middle of this circle rather than circling him on the opposite side of the circle. He decides to cut across the circle. This is his exact words. He decides to cut across the circle, and it basically starts accelerating towards him and whizzes off like over his shoulder. This is exactly what would happen if he was having this parallax illusion where he was misjudging the distance. Because he thought it was like 2 miles away, it was actually 1 mile away. It would appear. He would give you this very, very strong illusion. And people have done recreations of this. There's a guy on Reddit did a recreation of the entire incident from Fravor's perspective, which showed that the object need not be moving. And everything that Fravor described can be explained by this parallax illusion.
The problem is, it's not just Fravor.
I know, but that's why Alex's account is different.
Because I have to take all sorts of assumptions to make that work. To make your analysis of this or your take on this, I have to have all sorts of assumptions, and one of those assumptions is basically Fravor just got it wrong, and Dietrich just got it wrong. I don't.
They got it wrong in different ways.
Yes, but I don't buy that. I mean, they would have. Okay, I think
right,
that's,
but you
I
buy
think that's
aliens.
A big deal. That's all. I just think
you
that's
buy
a big
aliens.
Deal.
Aliens is a big deal.
Well, aliens
like
is a big deal. But
a couple
I'm
of
not,
pilots making a mistake once in 20 years versus an alien spaceship having a dogfight with pilots.
I accept that pilots can make mistakes. I accept that they can fall into the sea if they're not paying attention to the instruments. I accept all that. What I don't accept is that these guys that are trained to the tunes of billions of dollars see something that they are seeing as tech, and that tech is moving and functioning. The pilots would have to be utterly incompetent. You wouldn't even be able to have a dogfight with a regular plane under that model where they can get it wrong constantly with this kind of parallax. I just don't.
It's an understandable illusion.
Well, right. Yeah, right. It's okay. All these guys are having an illusion. What do you think about the report? Let's get into that for a moment. What do you think is going to come out? I mean, the New York Times basically came out with a basic premise of the report or leaked information from it. Why do you think that the push has been so insistent to get this out? I mean, you've had elements of the Pentagon. It seems like they want it out. You've had the videos. Oh, so you don't buy that? You don't think that they want to get it out?
Elements of the Pentagon? Who are you talking about?
Well, I mean, when they started doing the project for the ATIP, they were basically studying advanced aircraft. Eventually, they added a few elements of...
That's not elements of the Pentagon. That's Harry Reid and Rob Bigelow.
Okay, Harry Reid, Bob Bigelow. Fair enough. But you know my point. The Pentagon is bringing up a report.
Pentagon would rather not talk about this because what we're talking about here is basically an overlap of two things.
Yeah.
There are some people who are interested in UFOs as aliens and the ET hypothesis, and they're interested in disclosure. There's also a lot of very, very real issues. There are airspace incursions that we can't identify, which could be foreign drones, or it could be misperceptions of the pilots, or it could be equipment failure. These are all things that are very, very serious. These are actual UAPs, and they're classed as UAPs, and they need to be looked into. But then we've also got things like ATIP, which was essentially a pet project of Harry Reid, which he kind of gave to his friend Rob Bigelow, and this kind of evolved into this UAP task force. But this is this tiny little boutique little program within the Pentagon, which isn't really something that the military thinks is good. The ATIP produced this 700-page report, and the military found it to be so embarrassing and ridiculous that they didn't release it because it was just full of nonsense speculation. So I think we were kind of conflating a whole bunch of things. The UAP task force, I don't think is particularly serious. The UAP report that's coming out is just basically essentially a summary of the UAP task force. And I really don't think they're going to release any good evidence. What we've seen so far is just these leaks of these videos, which are terrible. Things like the green triangle. It's just nonsense.
The links like the green triangle are nonsense. You had a video where you had a bunch of things swarming our ships. Not just swarming, chasing our ships. The USS Kidd, the USS Raphael, the USS Russell. You have videos being released by the task force showing these items that are in the sky that are surrounding our ships. You saw the telemetry for these items. Now, I'm not saying that these items are aliens, but I don't know what they are. But I can't necessarily just throw them.
But they're not doing anything that breaks the laws of physics. They're just consistent with being drones, or consistent with being like glitches on the radar.
Nobody said. But
so those are things that need investigating.
Right there, that's my point. In order to make your hypothesis work, either it has to be perpetual glitches in radars. It has to be pilots who are trained to basically identify items in the sky, but based on your premise that these things are just misperceptions. And even when evidence comes out showing, okay, here's radar information, here is, pilot testimony, here are the ships that are involved, here are the people that were involved. To you, none of that stuff meets the level of a certain degree of evidence. What about Salazar? What about Captain Salas? Right here. So Captain Salas. Captain Salas was part of the installation for the nuclear missiles. I think he was covering like 10 missiles. One of the people sees something outside. They see lights in the sky. And the pilot, not the pilot, but the person who's in the military thing is freaking out because he sees a UFO hovering near the installation. The missile silos go off. Now, I don't know if this is included in the report. I think there were 120 items in the report. And even in Project Blue Book, there was a lot of stuff that the people couldn't necessarily identify, couldn't figure out what it was, despite the scientific inquiry on these items. It would mean that Russia and China has radically leapfrogged us in technology in such a way that they can shut down our nuclear facilities. Like, that's what I'm getting at. This is so difficult to believe.
You know when that report was? You know when that event was?
Yes, this was a while ago. This was back in the 90s.
It was 1967.
Okay.
That's 55 years ago.
I know,
so
but
you're saying that the Russians had anti-gravity technology back then? So
that's my point. That's my point.
You're saying it was aliens, basically. So you're eliminating the possibility based on this one case. But all that is, the missiles went offline, and there was a big investigation, and the officials concluded that these lights outside the gate had nothing to do with it. But they don't know why they went offline. It's some technical reason. But, it's the secret stuff, so they probably wouldn't tell us. But, it's another UFO sighting that happened to coincide with something. Over the whole course of human history, we have coincidences. Something's happened at roughly the same time. It doesn't actually mean anything.
That's a whole lot of coincidences.
Do you know how many coincidences there are?
Do you believe that all 120 of the items that these guys are...
No, I don't. I do not believe. Whatever you're going to say, I do not believe
fair
it.
Enough.
Because it's gross
fair enough.
Mischaracterization. You are lumping all 120 things as being one thing. They're all different things. So no matter what you say, all 120 things, they're all different.
They're all different, except that they're all different. But what I'm getting at is...
radically different.
Let's say, but all of them, I guess what I'm getting at, these guys are looking at, these guys are investigating, and they're not going to get an answer for all of them. They're going to say Russia, China, some of them are probably going to be us. But the catch is, I don't believe that each and every one of these things are entirely explainable. And many of the issues that we talked about today, we're talking about pilots, we're talking about some background technology or whatever else, or testimony. And none of these things meet any level of evidence for you.
Do you know why they're not explainable? The reason they're not explainable is that we don't have enough information. These are all things that they're like fuzzy video far in the distance. They're like radar. They're where it doesn't actually correspond with something that was actually seen, so we don't know if the radar return is genuine. Or they're eyewitness accounts, which are notoriously unreliable. We don't have enough information to make a determination about what these things are. But that doesn't mean that you've got to leap to them being aliens.
No, it's not that I think you need to leap to them being aliens. It's just that I am greatly suspicious of perpetual debunking and the need to basically ignore testimony of somebody who, if I'm not mistaken, was flying on 9/11, Fravor. I don't doubt.
I'm not ignoring it. I just discussed it in great depth. I talk about it all the time. I'd love to interview a Fravor.
Yeah, that would be a great thing. I would love to hear that interview. I'd love to hear that interview. I guess my thing is saying, and I know I used the term swamp gas. I don't mean it derogatory. I just mean it. All of this stuff is being poo-pooed away, despite the fact that it's eyewitness testimony, it's background data from the standpoint of telemetry. Even if it's not doing something that is breaking the laws of physics, it doesn't really matter. The fact that it's a it doesn't conform to our avionics in and of itself on some level breaks our laws of physics. I mean, if you have a ball that is basically moving, and let's say it's not a balloon, then what's the propulsion? How is it has the capability of going in and out of water? True. And by the way, Elizondo, do you believe that Luis Elizondo is just lying or making it up? Meaning when he's looking at all of this evidence behind the scenes, he says, look, there's classified stuff, and he's giving you allegories and examples. Do you believe he's just making it up? I mean, what do you think his agenda is?
I think, I interviewed Luis Elizondo for my podcast. And I asked him, at the start, are you familiar with my analyses? And then we started talking about it, and I said, like, well, the gimbal thing, the thing is it's a rotating glare. And we started talking about it, and it was quite clear he had no idea about this rotating glare hypothesis, and he did not understand it. I had to explain it to him on my podcast. So I think he really hasn't done very much analysis, which means that the ATIP program that he was in really hasn't done very much analysis.
Is it possible that the rotating glare thing just was bogus? That it was
no, he didn't. He didn't understand it. He literally did not understand it. So that meant that they had not actually considered it as a possibility.
I guess, is it possible they didn't consider it as a possibility because it was multiple people looking at some of these events? Meaning, he's not just... because what I'm getting at is, it wasn't. Even though you're only seeing 3 videos, Luis Elizondo is not just seeing 3 videos. He's seeing a ton of stuff that is either classified. Sure. He's seeing stuff behind the scenes. He's alluded to this notion of tech. And this stuff's classified. And so it's like, yes, he may not know I don't know about Chris the Mellon stuff. Go for it.
Chris Mellon, who, the former was assistant undersecretary for Defense for Intelligence, he's seen these secret videos. And he says publicly that the most compelling of all the videos is the gimbal video, which means there are no more compelling videos than that one.
Okay, I need to hear Chris say that. And I would love to have Chris as an interview, to have these conversations with Chris. He's been notoriously hard to get contact with. Mick, thank you for this interview, man. I really do appreciate this. And I hopefully there was nothing that was overly aggressive or overly pushy or anything like that.
No, I think a lively back and forth is good because it helps us resolve misunderstandings.
Yes.
Sometimes I think we have mutual misunderstandings, and I like to explain where I'm coming from, and it's great to hear where you're coming from.
And look, and I've said it before, it's vitally important to not accept everything that's given whole cloth, because look, I know you may not necessarily buy this, but it does seem that the government is being more open with this. I mean, if you look at the Navy, for example, the Navy changed their protocols. If you're looking at the videos that were released, the videos that were released pushed the Pentagon to behave in that way. The Pentagon could have said these videos are bogus. They didn't do that. Meaning it's not just 2 or 3 yahoos trying to get the stuff out. There does seem to be a concerted effort, even choreographed, to get this data out. I mean, okay, I'm not going to push too hard on that point. I'm just making the point that saying the Pentagon at every step of the way could have killed this process like years ago. They didn't do it.
They're not talking a lot, though.
Well, they're not
Susan
talking a
Goff
lot,
is always giving this boilerplate response. We've been either, we can't comment on ongoing investigations, and the results of the investigations will be classified, so it's unlikely to be released. They've said the same thing fairly consistently for a long time. They don't seem to be that open, really.
But it just kind of depends on the process. I mean, it's environmental. If the United States gets into a war with Vietnam, the United States loses that war if Vietnam still is there and is not under U.S. control, despite the fact that Vietnam lost millions of people. Same thing is true with this. It's contextual. When Project Blue Book was out, they had a very explicit interest in killing any notion of the UFO issue. The Pentagon could have did the same thing here. And the fact that they didn't do it is indicative of something. I get your point, that they could have been more forthcoming and say, hey, here's the whatever, if they wanted to kind of make that case. But I'm making the point that the fact that they're not pushing against it is in and of itself, on some level, considering their past behavior for it. If that makes sense. That makes sense.
I think they kind of are pushing against it. If you look at the internal emails between the Navy spokespeople, they've said quite explicitly that they have a no comment policy on this, and that everything has to be funneled through Susan Goff, and she hardly says anything. So
well, I don't think
they're not really that forthcoming.
I don't think it's an absolute. Like, I don't think it's everybody. That's not my argument. I just think there are elements of that they're just trying to get it out, elements that don't want it to come out. Mick,
we'll see. We'll see.
Well, and let's close on this. What do you think that report is going to show? Or do you think there are going to be any downstream consequences from the report one way or the other?
I don't think it will show very much more than what we heard in the New York Times report. They've concluded it's not our technology, and all the analysis they hinted to was like the wind was blowing the wrong way in some cases for it to be balloons, which is a ridiculously lightweight analysis. So I'm not really expecting very much. I think the task force is greatly understaffed, and I think the report has probably just been written by 1 or 2 guys like working the phones and working the emails. So I don't think we'll get very much out of it.
Just to be clear, though, when they're talking about the wind and stuff like that, that's not the totality of the analysis. It's just one element of it.
No, but that's all they've said. They made a point. They made a specific point of addressing that not every case could be a balloon, which is a nonsense nonsensical thing to say anyway. So
last thing,
that's all we've got so far.
Lying?
Sorry, what's that?
Do you think Obama is lying?
No, he's just saying what everybody else is saying, which is true, that we have reports of things that move in ways that we can't immediately explain. We get radar glitches, we get radar returns that, maybe there are alien spaceships moving at hypersonic speeds, or maybe there's something wrong with the radar. We don't know which one of those it is, and so it's something that needs looking into.
The voice that you guys were listening to is Mick West. Mick West is author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect, and host of the podcast Tales from the Rabbit Hole. He's a retired video game programmer who helped make Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise. Mick runs the website metabunk.org, where he investigates conspiracy theories and debunks pseudoscience and investigates UFO videos. I remember that Tony Hawk skating game. If I'm not mistaken, I even had that Tony Hawk skating game. I think I'm telling on myself in regards to age. Mick, again, man, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. All right, guys.
Thank you for an interesting conversation.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to end this here, guys. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Mick was phenomenal in this. He was nice enough to kind of sit here and we can have our fight. And I will talk to you guys a little bit later tonight. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe.